Chapter 3, Playing Truant. A shrill buzzing in her ear awoke Doris from her slumber. Opening her eyes, she realised it was an alarm clock that was making all the din, so sleepily fumbled around with it with one hand until she succeeded in switching it off. It was then that she realised someone's arm was around her waist. Looking at the clock, she knew it wasn't hers. For a few moments she couldn't register where she was. Then it dawned on her. She'd spent the night with Bruno, and it was his arm that she could feel wrapped around her. Turning round slowly, she was able to focus on his face. He was still asleep, and looked so angelic as he lay there by her side, on his front, head to one side. Softly she touched his face, stroking a few curls out of the way which had fallen over his eyes. Then she leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek. Several minutes later Bruno opened his eyes and found himself staring straight into her large hazel ones. "Good morning," Doris whispered, a rather cute grin displayed across her face. "Morning," he replied, a little croakily, still looking half asleep. This was followed by a large yawn and a long stretch. Doris sat herself up and glanced at the clock, since she'd hardly noticed the time while she'd been trying to silence the alarm. "It's 7:15, she said, then looked at Bruno. "How long does it take to get to school from here?" "About 3/4 of an hour, because of the traffic," he replied, then added, "I usually get up at 7:45, if I wake up, that is." He smiled, then settled his arm around Doris and drew her closer, to deliver a kiss on her lips, to which she immediately responded. There was no shyness now between them. That had gone. "You know, I'd rather stay here with you all day than go to school," he admitted. "Maybe you would, but then we wouldn't get our grades, Martelli, and without grades we'd flunk." Bruno's face changed to a look of apprehension. "I'm failing anyway, or so Miss Davenport says." "Oh, her! She wouldn't know a good musician if she tripped over him," Doris replied, trying to offer reassurance. She looked into his eyes and noticed they were glazed slightly, so squeezed one hand affectionately. "Martelli, don't worry about it. I'll see Miss Grant today and—" He cut her off. "Doris, I can't face it today. I just can't." "You mean her lesson, Davenport's?" Bruno nodded, a sombre look on his face. "But if I talk to Miss Grant before the lesson," Doris suggested. "What if she isn't in? I mean, just suppose she doesn't come to school today. I'll still have to face 6th period, won't I?" Bruno asked, but he didn't need any answer, as he knew what would happen. "So you want to what?" "I don't want to go to school today." "You want to skive? Martelli, you've never ever skived lessons before," Doris said, astonished. "I've never faced Davenport before either," Bruno replied moodily. He looked away, glanced briefly at the time. It was 7:50, then looked at Doris again. Well, what? Do you think I should go or stay?" "It's up to you, Martelli," Doris replied, and continued with, "But if you're not going to school, then neither am I." "Doris," Bruno protested, "I'm not stopping you from studying." "Oh, what's one day going to matter? It won't kill me to miss one single day of gruelling study." "Right then, I'm skiving," Bruno announced, but inside he felt a little guilty. "Bruno," Doris said, "you can't run away from this problem. Perhaps you need a day of freedom, but she'll still be there when you go back on Friday." "I know that, Doris. I just need, like you said, some freedom for a while." A short silence fell, then Doris spoke. "OK, how are we going to spend today? A ride on the Staten Island ferry? Another visit to Chinatown? Or should we just laze around in Central Park and have a picnic?" Bruno sighed, then smiled. "Central Park sounds nice." "Central Park it is, then," Doris announced, and gave him a brief kiss, to which Bruno held her just that little bit tighter as they kissed again, allowing it to last for a few tender minutes. If there was one thing he needed, it was to have a close friend by his side, and he realised he was so lucky and glad to have Doris as his very first girlfriend and companion. "What's for breakfast?" Doris asked him when the kiss had ended. Her stomach was getting the better of her, and eating was the next best thing to romance, she decided. "Waffles, maple syrup, cornflakes or Fruit Loops, toast and coffee," Bruno replied, also feeling quite peckish. "Delicious," Doris replied, grinning madly. 10 minutes later they were both down in the kitchen, trying not to make too much noise, as they knew Mr. Martelli was still sleeping after working on a late shift. Bruno wondered if his father had come into his room while Doris and he had been sleeping and had seen her, but it wouldn't have mattered if he had. Angelo Martelli was always getting on his son's case about the female species and why Bruno didn't seem to have any girlfriends on the horizon. Well, now he couldn't go on at him, because he had Doris, who at present was more of a very close friend than a lover, but in time Bruno had a feeling things would start to develop. And as he watched him messing around with a pile of cornflakes, trying to flick them into the bowl with her fingers, kind of like tiddlywinks, he realised that one day, maybe sooner, he'd want to sleep with her again, only this time he'd want to take it further. While he was gazing at her, she looked up and noticed his expression. "What?" Doris asked, a little puzzled. "Nothing," Bruno replied with a smile, and shrugged his shoulders. Doris continued with her tiddlywinks game with the cornflakes, then stopped. Something had entered her mind, and she knew it would help Bruno over this Miss Davenport problem. "Hey, what do you say we go see Shorofsky today in the hospital?" "I'd love to," Bruno replied, wondering if she was thinking just what he was thinking. She was. "We were planning to go anyway, and—" She paused and took hold of his hand. "The minute Mr. Shorofsky discovers how you've been treated, Miss Darling Davenport won't be allowed to set foot in the School of the Arts ever again," Doris said, feeling a little triumphant by her speech. Bruno was also beginning to relax over the situation he'd been going through, and knew his old music teacher would be able to lend a helpful hand. "I'll ring the hospital now," Bruno said, rising from his seat, whereupon he went out into the hall to dial the number. "Hello? This is Bruno Martelli, a pupil of Mr. Shorofsky's. Is it possible to speak to him at all?" His expression of hope changed to disappointment. "Oh, I see. OK, thanks. Bye." He returned to Doris and the kitchenette, who looked up eagerly till she noticed his look. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Mr. Shorofsky's been given some kind of drug which relaxes him, and it's been allowing him to sleep soundly. A nurse told me it would be wise for me to visit him tomorrow, not today." "Well, don't worry then," Doris assured him, rising from her chair. She went over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll both go and see him tomorrow." She gave him a brief hug, then added, "Well, are you going to help me make these sandwiches? If we're going on a picnic, we'll need sandwiches." Bruno looked up at her. "I'm dreading tomorrow," he said sadly, then returned to gazing at the table. "Martelli, it's today at the moment, and we are going to have a great day out in Central Park, OK?" She lifted his head up with her fingertips. "OK?" she said again. "OK," Bruno replied, and allowed a smile to appear on his face. "What are we having in the sandwiches?" he asked. "Peanut butter and jam," Doris replied. Both she and Bruno looked at each other, then burst out laughing. As promised, they spent their day in Central Park, lazily dreaming by the lake, boating on the lake, and finally it was rounded off by a trip around the park in a hansom cab, which was closed in due to a chilly breeze which had arisen during the afternoon. This enabled them to snuggle up close and admire the picturesque view. Doris had always said that Central Park could be a very romantic spot, and in her case she was right. But all too soon it was over, and although Doris spent the night curled up next to him again, Bruno couldn't sleep very well at all. It was just the thought of setting eyes on Miss Davenport which made him shiver. Doris noticed him sat up in bed beside her and reached out to hold his hand, whereupon she found it was freezing. "You cold?" she asked. "No, I'm just thinking about Miss Davenport." Doris sighed sympathetically, then drew him close. "Come here," she said softly, to which he obeyed, and together they snuggled up tightly for the rest of the night.